I was aware that this was extremely risky, and Stockton was very clear. He said, do you have a wife? And I said, no. Do you have kids? And I said, nope. He said, okay, you're in.
Well, I'm really not sure what the big joke is about. 5 people died in this incident. Karl Stanley told Business Insider that he believes the Titan implosion was not an accident. He wrote that the biggest hanging question is who else should be held responsible and to what extent. People that stood by and did nothing, kept giving him funding, should be held accountable, Stanley said. What about people who, in hindsight, are talking about this as though no one did anything wrong? Who is the unmitigated bad guy of this story? If you say it's Stockton Rush, well, who is essentially the second in command? Who was pushing the false PR narrative? Who was selling the fairy tale, doing all of that marketing in the media and on social media for what was bound to be an inevitable nightmare for somebody? Does Stockton's wife, Wendy, who has been very quiet since the incident and who was entirely absent when her husband's pet project was under scrutiny, was the focus of a major Coast Guard investigation, what responsibility does she have, if any?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. It's actually incredible. 2 documentaries are dropping at almost the same time. For those who have Netflix, you'll be able to watch the analysis on the Titan sub on June 11th. That's less than 2 weeks away. In the meantime, Karl Stanley has a message for viewers, and he communicated it in a recent interview that he gave to Business Insider. He said, I think initially people were very focused on how this happened. What part failed? Is it even possible for carbon fiber to make a hull? That's what Stanley wrote to Business Insider. For Stanley, the issue is quite simple. It's not a question of materials, but the man, the quality of the man, not the quality of the materials. And for Stanley, the greatest flaw was in Stockton Rush, in his hubris.
Well, you're not wrong.
Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're really interested in my analysis of the Titan submersible, but specifically how these documentaries deal with it and what they leave out, you might want to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Please also hit the thanks button if you haven't already, and let's get started.
When you're inside of Titan on your descent, you're just free falling. You're just heavy, and your gravity is pushing you down.
You're essentially in the dark, just enough light to see.
No. Left is forward is down on the left stick.
This is
Forward.
down?
That's up.
That's up?
Yep.
That's down?
Yep.
It doesn't sound terribly exciting, does it? I mean, have you ever flown in an aeroplane at night? There's not really much to see. Now, with the documentaries, Stanley wrote that he hopes that the public perception will be less that submersibles are unsafe or scary, but rather the focus that Rush was a man, in his words, hell-bent on glory that should have been stopped not by laws, but by the people around him, and surely not funded to the tune of tens of millions. I tend to disagree with that a little bit. I think laws should be in place to deal with this sort of thing, and there are certain safety standards that could have prevented this in terms of the jurisdiction. Beyond certain jurisdictions, there aren't any laws governing maritime law, and that is where Stockton Rush operated, which is quite interesting. And so I do think the law needs to protect and deal with individuals like this. Now, of course, the other side of this is that Stockton surrounded himself by yes men, and also by a young staff who were necessarily naive, like Petros Mathiodakis. We heard from him in the opening intro. He's a marine technician, and he was part of the crew on OceanGate's Titan submersible during a record-breaking dive in 2019. It's actually strange how he's smiling, and it's, dealing with such a somber subject, it still kind of seems as though it still hasn't sunken in as far as he's concerned. Now, I have to say I differ from Stanley in that while I think it's obvious that Stockton Rush deserves the lion's share of responsibility, I also think carbon fiber cannot and shouldn't be left off the hook. Even now, 2 years later, there are many people who seem none the wiser that carbon fiber might be a sensible material to use under extreme pressure. There's some people who will still defend carbon fiber, and there are quite a lot of people who will say, I don't know. Really? At this point, you still don't know, or you're giving the wrong answer. Now, to understand how nonsensical this application actually is, one has to remember Stockton was a pilot with a degree in aerospace engineering. That's another term for designing aeroplanes, designing vehicles that fly through the air and have very different pressure differentials, much lower pressure differentials than deep sea craft. As a young man, he built his own airplane and flew in it. Well, how is that any different from building his own submersible and going down to the Titanic in it? Well, actually it turned out very, very, very different. I'm using carbon fiber in this airplane. It works for me. Why can't I use carbon fiber in the submersible? Well, there is a reason. You might think it's no different to building a submersible, same shape, same materials, right, as an aircraft. Absolutely wrong on both counts. And if you, at this point, 2 years later, and you still haven't made those connections, you still haven't reached these realizations, I'm not sure if you ever will. Even Karl Stanley seemed to underestimate the perils of carbon fiber, despite him having direct experience of it. Even after his nightmare descent in the Titan, when the craft made a series of deafening bangs as sections of carbon fiber cracked and snapped during their descent. According to Business Insider, Stanley said in a 2024 interview that although he was already skeptical of the hull's integrity, so in other words, he has some doubts, but not enough doubts to prevent him from going down, he didn't realize the full extent of the vessel's issues until he read about them in a Wired piece published 1 year after the fatal dive. So here you have someone who's in this industry, who's had first-hand experience, and he still doesn't realize the full extent of something until it's explained to him essentially by a journalist in a publication. In terms of this report, it said that a crack was discovered on the Titan's hull during an inspection conducted around June 2019. What happened as a result of that? This forced Rush to build another version of the submersible and delay the Titanic expedition. Just consider the basics of what is being explicated in terms of that. A crack is discovered on Titan's hull, and it's like, oh my God, wow, this carbon fiber hull was actually cracked. I didn't think of that. I didn't realize that. You heard it. You know what carbon fiber's potentialities are, don't you? And so it seems like until you've shown it, until it's revealed, well, then I'm not really going to realize it. Wow, that's kind of disappointing. Now, for me, the fascination of this story is also the horror of it. That in the very search of the mystique surrounding the Titanic, you're so immersed in everything to do with the Titanic, the psychology, the hubris, all the expense and all the lives lost. With that whole graveyard sitting beneath them, somehow the folks in this story drummed up precisely the same delusional fantasy, where they somehow seem to be above the laws of nature, only to succumb to them. It's this idea that something is unsinkable or unbreakable simply because they said so or believed it was. It's unsinkable and unbreakable until it isn't, until it wasn't. But then it's too late. How many aspects of our lives defy reality in some way, where there is a mathematical certainty that we are wrong about something or someone, but we can only see it once it happens, and actually some of us still can't, even when it's demonstrated to you? Can you think of something in your life that you believed, that you invested in, that turned out to be a ruinous fairy tale? I can. It might even be a vehicle that you should have stopped repairing and turned your back on sooner rather than later. And it's important to be critical and to be honest about our past failures. This isn't about pointing the finger at you or pointing the finger at someone else. It's about your ability to point your finger at yourself and to acknowledge where you could have done better, where your decision making was possibly defective. Why? So that we don't repeat these mistakes in the future, that we are learning from our errors, right? And can we be honest about mistakes we made? Because as long as you are not honest about that, you're either in denial or something worse. Something worse is going on where you simply cannot acknowledge the truth about yourself or about a situation. If human beings turn out to be a species that in the main cannot interpret reality, cannot be honest about reality, cannot even see reality for what it is, then that means we cannot adapt in a functional way. And what does that mean? It means we are inherently dysfunctional. And then if that's the case, we don't deserve to survive. If that's the case, our destruction is a mathematical certainty as well. Do you think it's all hypothetical? Consider such present issues as climate change. And to the extent that you may hear those words and scoff, a red light should be going on in the dashboard of your submersible, the submersible of your life. A red light should definitely be going on. And, while we're arguing about whether it exists, the pressure on our carbon fiber, our common carbon fiber consciousness mounts. And what do you think will eventually happen if we persist with this course of action?
The first time the carbon fiber made a noise in that hall, it was extremely loud. It was like a gunshot. Any noise would have been loud, but that was loud. Everyone stops talking for a little bit and, okay, I think we're okay.
I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.